Studio Gaga and Kujimori have continued blessing us with more Berserk content in 2023, and we're all here for it. If you guys have been following our chapter breakdowns for the past few months, you know that chapter 375 had a lot we got right and also a few things we got wrong. We finally got the reason for the arrival of the entire Kushan Navy just to capture Roderick's vessel, but we also didn't see the very thing we were dreading was going to happen, which is good news for everyone in the story, of course, but a little disappointing as well if we're being completely honest. But what was that reason? And what happened that was good for all the captives aboard the Seahorse? And where are we going now? We'll answer all that and more in this video. This is the full analytical breakdown of Berserk, chapter 375. Salat and the Bakiraka have arrived at the Seahorse thanks to Daiba's guidance. Chapter 375 picks up a few moments before the end of 374 and takes us to the other side of the Seahorse's capture. If you want to catch up with what happened in chapter 374, go check out our breakdown video on that from our Berserk playlist, but TLDR, it basically shows the Kushan soldiers boarding in an elaborate fashion, many of those soldiers trying to chain Guts up, and it ends with the arrival of Salat and Rickert. Chapter 375 opens up with Salat's perspective, and it turns out he's as much in the dark about what's going on with this mission as his targets. Someone off-screen asks him about the forecast, and he reports that this darkness isn't much different from noon, as we see panels of Roderick's Seahorse being chained down by his Bakiraka. The voice off-screen says that he's right, of course, given that he is the young master of the Bakiraka, and that the question was a slip of the tongue, before we get laughing voice effects, which we'll explain a bit later in the video. Salat then spits some lines that sound almost like a prophecy, and we'll paraphrase his dialogue here to avoid confusing with the multiple translations floating around online. Salat says, when the moon turns into a bow in the night sky, from the ocean, where the sun sets, a chained beast would come covered in a hazy fog. He then calls out the oracle of said prophecy and confirms what we've been saying since we learned the Eastern Exile chapter was real, that Guts and Co. were found thanks to the fortune-telling of Ganishka's former wizard general, Daiba. Salat says that Daiba's fortune-telling appears to have been correct, but he fails to understand where the wooden horse carrying their target is coming from. This is a reference to Roderick's Seahorse, of course, which has multiple equestrian motifs adorning it, but it's also a fancy way of saying ship, as they are the horses of the sea in a sense. Salat thinks that though it's a single vessel, it's a triple-decker war galley and it comes from the west, so it could have been sent out as a scouting vessel by Falconia, but Daiba rejects this thought based on the distance between their two lands. This implies that Daiba and Salat didn't just go back to the Bakiraka hideout, they went back to fill the power vacuum left in the Kushan homeland after Ganishka's demise, a claim that can be verified by Salat's next question to Daiba. If this is true, then that makes Griffith's goal of moving his forces to the east back in chapter 372 much more understandable. It also puts the Bakiraka clan in a position they've always wanted, back home and probably far above what they were expecting as well, because it seems like now they're running the show. While he knows that the prophecy is correct, he can't help but feel their response is exaggerated, as they have seemingly mobilized the entire Kushan Navy, or at least the ships that are left after the Midland invasion anyways, and all to capture just one ship. Salat wonders via thought transference whether Daiba is plotting something or whether he already has a full grasp on what they're about to encounter, to which Daiba says it's the latter. He claims that the only reason he hasn't explained his visions in detail is because it's his role to facilitate the prophecy, not partake in it, as he flies his Garuda to get a view of the deck in anticipation of what comes next. The chained beast emerges completely defeated. Guts' reaction to a capture attempt. As Daiba gets a full view of the Seahorse's deck, he internally snickers like a schoolgirl with anticipation at what's about to come next. He thinks to himself that we shall see what emerges from the bush we poked, which makes it pretty clear that he knows they're out to get Guts and Silet doesn't. However, this next part he must not have anticipated because it comes as a shock to everyone gathered, including the crew members of the Seahorse. One of the final panels of chapter 374 showed Guts stepping out onto the deck. Now, given how he was being roughhoused and the conversation he had with the Beast of Darkness in 373, we thought it was a safe bet to assume he might just go berserk and never come back at this point. Turns out, we were entirely wrong, because Guts has completely lost his fighting spirit, to the point that he's been taken captive and walked up to the deck of the Seahorse in chains, showing zero resistance. He's chained up from every angle. His feet are chained, his arms have been chained behind his back, there's multiple chains wrapped all around his torso, and he's being pulled by multiple Kushan soldiers, all the while sweating and dry heaving like a man dying of thirst. When Morta sees him, she's relieved that he's alright. Perhaps because she's been the only one cognizant of the threat Guts himself posed to the safety of the seahorse in his current state. But everyone else was shocked by what they were seeing, and even Morta's relief was replaced by concern rather quickly. Serpico was the first one to break the silence by expressing his disbelief at what he was seeing, Guts not fighting back against his captors even a little bit. As someone who was tasked with capturing Guts at one point in his life, Serpico is intimately aware of just how difficult Guts has made that for everyone who tries to do it. Sure, Serpico was the reason that Guts was even taken in by the Holy Iron Chain Knights in the first place, but that happened right after Guts' life or death match with Rosine, and Serpi used the numbers advantage, as well as Guts' current state, to his own advantage, by hitting him with a well-placed branch right on an arrow wound. But every time Guts has been in fighting shape, Serpico has been unable to defeat him, even in an environment specifically suited to his own rapier-based fighting style, such as the Room of Pillars in the Van Diemen estate. What he was seeing now was complete surrender from a man who simply doesn't surrender, and it shocks him. But it's an even worse gut punch for Isidro, who idolizes Guts. Isidro can't even get words out when he sees Guts allowing himself to be taken captive like that. And when Guts falls face first after barely putting up a struggle and being yanked to the ground, Isidro snaps. He breaks free from the Kushan guy holding him and runs in Guts' direction on the upper deck, all the while urging him to fight like he always does. Isidro tanks, having his head slammed on the railing of the upper deck once he realizes Guts isn't going to fight back, and then starts calling him an idiot and asking him if this is it, with tears in his eyes as he himself now gets slammed to the ground. Serpico is deeply concerned for the young man, as we pan and see everyone else too basically feels the same way Isidro does. They're just not able to express it. Farnace, Morta, Magnifico, the folks from Elfhelm, they're all in utter disbelief at the sight now in front of them. Now, the reason why Guts doesn't do anything to the Kushan guys is multi-layered, but at the core of it lies what we just said a few minutes ago. He's completely lost his will to fight. After losing Casca to Griffith yet again, Guts has lost complete faith in his sword, which was once like a part of his own body to him, a part that never let him down, even in the most fatal of encounters. Couple that with the fact that the Beast of Darkness just basically told him he was worthless without his own malice, and the after effects of constantly using the Berserker armor for days on end, and you realize that whatever's happening to Guts right now has pretty much been foreshadowed since Bodark V1. Guts has been losing his vision steadily since he got the Berserker armor, but he can barely see now. His body's tics have become so bad that he usually needs to tape the Dragon Slayer to his right hand to fight. The Berserker armor is basically killing him, and we cannot discount that fact when we talk about why Guts is not putting up any resistance to his captors. He is truly broken. Mind, spirit, and body. And as someone who serves as a symbol of hope for his entire crew, seeing him that way has just taken the wind out of their sails completely. With everyone nearly giving in to the hopelessness of their situation, an unlikely savior emerges to rescue them from what they thought was going to be their ultimate fate. Rickert saves the crew, and Salat takes them all to Kushan land. Isidro was going pretty crazy with his meltdown, calling out Guts by name multiple times, which obviously drew the attention of the biggest Chad in all of Berserk, Big Ricky, aka Rickert. Chapter 374 ended with Rickert's piercing doe eyes staring into the abyss that is the lower decks of the Seahorse, and we knew that at some point he would end up getting involved with Guts in this chapter. We just didn't expect it to be this way. After hearing Isidro's pleas, Rickert steps out of the crowd of Kushan soldiers and makes his way towards the chained beast Daiba had set them on. He kneels, takes off his helmet, confirms that it's his old running buddy by checking for his brand, and then claims to be surprised that he would run into Guts here of all places. Interestingly, Puck watches the scene unfold and shows a sign of recognition when he sees Rickert take off his helmet, but he doesn't say anything. This is probably because, as an elf, Puck has a naturally short memory span, but maybe he is now somewhat clued in to what this whole causality business is all about, because even someone as ignorant as Puck can recognize the fact that Guts and Rickert always seem to meet each other at Guts' lowest points in life. We'll see how Studio Gaga plays this plot thread in the coming chapters, but it's clear that Rickert meeting Guts and his entire crew here was no chance encounter. It was fated by causality, as we predicted in our predictions video for this chapter. He immediately switches his language to the Kushan native and commands them to cut their captives' bonds, which they promptly do. He apologizes to Roderick for their rough treatment, claiming the Kushan have been unstable in recent times, but the captain of the Seahorse is just glad to have his pleas for an English speaker from chapter 374 answered. Rickert explains that he is a Midlander, like Roderick, and most of the people aboard the Seahorse, and that he's been associated with the Kushan army for some time for reasons he doesn't disclose quite yet. He admits that he didn't expect to find people that communicate in his language this far out east, but explains that because Roderick's Seahorse trespassed on Kushan waters, they will be taken in as political captives for the time being. The crew of the Seahorse is loaded onto the smaller Kushan rowboats as the Seahorse itself is steered to shore by the rest of the Navy. After seeing who the chained beast was, Salat commends Daiba for planning ahead, because a target like the Black Swordsman definitely requires the mobilization of the entire Kushan Navy. Daiba chimes in by reminding Silat that they only pulled this off because Guts was asleep. Had he been awake, the entire Kushan Navy would amount to nothing in front of him. He mockingly congratulates Salat on a job well done, and before Salat can reprimand him for toying with him by telling him that this was some kind of prophecy, Daiba takes his leave, telling Salat he'll be waiting for him back at the capital. The Bakiraka prince thinks to himself that while Ganishka had fallen, and Daiba's assistance in escaping Falconia was invaluable, he couldn't shake the feeling that Daiba was still somehow Ganishka's man. He laments on the follies of men with bottomless ambition, and muses on what the appearance of the Black Swordsman could mean in the grand scheme of things. We see Rickert and Puck briefly lock eyes for a moment as the crew gets rowed into Kushan land, signified by the giant Taj Mahal-looking structure they approach in the final panel of the chapter. Marvelous verdict! Chapter 375 was pretty much consistent with everything we had predicted it would be, minus Guts going berserk, which makes sense when you take into consideration everything we mentioned about his physical condition in the previous segment. Now that the two groups that know the truth about Griffith's existence and the nature of apostles have been united, we can expect Berserk to start gearing up for the final stages of its story. With Griffith planning to march east and Guts and Shirke currently incapacitated, our protagonists are going to have to rely on the guidance of Rickert, Salat, and Daiba. And one of them is shady at best and cooking up some downright evil scheme at worst. Though Boat Arc 2.0 has come to an end, we're still not out of choppy waters, as many questions still remain unanswered. The chief one now being, well, how does Guts come back from his current condition? But that's a question for another video. The question we want to end this video with is what you guys thought about chapter 375. Besides its abhorrent translations, of course. Let us know in the comments section down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more quality Berserk content, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep on struggling, strugglers.